Hey everyone, and welcome to Deep Dive Daily. Today, we're getting into something really at the heart of India's constitution. We're going beyond just the hard and fast laws and the rights you can enforce in court. We're talking about a set of guiding ideals, a kind of moral blueprint for the entire nation. So let's get right into it, the Directive Principles of State Policy.
And you can't really talk about this without mentioning the great constitutional expert Granville Austin. He really hit the nail on the head when he said the directive principles, right alongside the fundamental rights, are the conscience of the Constitution. It's such a powerful phrase, right? It suggests they're the soul, the aspirations, the vision of what the nation is supposed to be. But what does that actually mean in practice?
Okay, so calling it the conscience is a great start. But what are we really talking about here? Let's break down what these principles actually are. You'll find them in Part 4 of the Constitution, running from Article 36 all the way to 51. And at their core, they are a set of instructions for the government on how to govern.
Think of it like this. The directive principles are basically a mission statement for the government, an idea inspired by the Irish Constitution, by the way. The people who framed the Constitution intended for any government, whether it's at the national, state, or even local level, to keep these goals front and center when they're making laws. And the ultimate goal? To move India from being just a police state focused on law and order to a true welfare state that actively works for the well-being of all its citizens.
Okay, but here's the part that trips a lot of people up, and it's absolutely crucial. Unlike your fundamental rights, you can't walk into a courtroom and sue the government for not following one of these principles. They are non-justiciable. Now, why would they do that? Well, the founders knew that a newly independent India just wouldn't have the money or the resources to make all these huge promises a reality overnight. So instead of legal enforcement, the real power behind them is the moral duty of the state and, of course, the pressure that we, the public, put on them. And this table here, it just lays out the difference so clearly. On one side, you have fundamental rights. They're legally enforceable, right? They're mostly negative, meaning they stop the state from doing things like restricting your speech. Their goal is political democracy, and the sanction is legal. But directive principles, they're the flip side. They're a moral obligation and they're positive. They tell the state what it should do, like provide free legal aid. Their aim is social and economic democracy, and the sanction is purely moral and political.
Now, to really get a handle on all these big ideas, it helps to know they're not just some random list. They actually fall into three main categories. Each one reflects a different stream of thought, a different philosophy that was really important to India's founders.
First up, we have what are known as the socialistic principles, and these are all about creating a democratic socialist state. The main focus here is achieving social and economic justice for everyone, and of course, trying to close the gap between the rich and the poor.
So you can see how these specific articles really start to build the foundation for a more equal society. You've got Article 39, which pushes for things like fair wages and making sure wealth doesn't just end up in a few hands. Then there's Article 39A, which was actually added later, that says the state must provide free legal aid to the poor, making sure justice isn't just for people who can afford a lawyer. And Article 42 calls for safe, humane working conditions.
All right, moving on to our second category. This one is deeply, deeply rooted in the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi. These principles are pretty much a direct reflection of the kind of society he envisioned and worked for during the freedom struggle. And you can see the focus here is totally different. It's all about building from the ground up, grassroots development. Article 40 is a big one. It's about empowering villages, the panchayats, to be units of self-government. Article 43 is about promoting small-scale cottage industries to boost rural economies. And Article 46 specifically directs the state to look out for the educational and economic well-being of the most vulnerable parts of society.
And that brings us to our third and final bucket, the liberal intellectual principles. This is where the ideology of modern liberalism really comes into play. These are about creating a state that is rational, tolerant, and forward-thinking.
And these articles, they paint a picture of a nation that's modern, scientific, and has a clear place on the world stage. For example, Article 44 calls for a uniform civil code for all citizens. Article 48A, another one added later, makes protecting the environment a state duty. And Article 51 basically lays out India's foreign policy: work for international peace and respect international law.
Okay, so you can probably guess what happened next, right? You've got these powerful, legally backed fundamental rights on one side, and these aspirational, non-enforceable directive principles on the other. A clash was pretty much inevitable. This led to this incredible constitutional tug-of-war between Parliament, which wanted to pass laws to make the directives a reality, and the Supreme Court, whose job it was to protect fundamental rights.
So let's just quickly trace how this whole conflict played out in the courts.
It started way back in 1951, where the Supreme Court basically said, nope, fundamental rights always win. Then things got even more intense in 1967, in the Goloknath case, where the court said Parliament can't even amend fundamental rights to implement the directives. Well, Parliament pushed back. And that led to the legendary Kesavananda Bharti case in 1973, which sort of found a middle ground. It said Parliament can amend rights, but not if it messes with the basic structure of the Constitution. Finally, the whole thing came to a head in 1980, in the Minerva Mills case, where the court landed on this idea of harmony and balance.
And that Minerva Mills case gave us this absolutely beautiful analogy to understand the relationship. The Supreme Court declared that the fundamental rights and the directive principles are two wheels of a chariot. Think about that. Neither one is more important than the other. If you try to give one total priority, you're going to upset the balance of the entire Constitution. They have to work together in harmony.
So this all begs the question, right? If you can't take the government to court over them, have these principles actually made a difference? Or are they just nice ideas on paper? Well, the answer is a resounding yes. They've had a huge impact. Many of them have been the direct springboard for some of the most important laws in the country. Let's look at some direct lines we can draw from a principle to an actual law on the books. Take Article 39A, the one about providing free legal aid to the poor. That principle led directly to the government passing the Legal Services Authorities Act in 1987. That's the law that set up the whole system of local auto lots to do exactly what the principle called for.
And you see the exact same pattern when it comes to the environment. The directive in Article 48A to protect forests and wildlife wasn't just a suggestion. It became the philosophical backbone for really strong laws like the Wildlife Protection Act and the Forest Conservation Act.
And here's another crystal clear one. Article 42 called for humane working conditions and maternity relief. Well, that directly spurred the creation of the Maternity Benefit Act all the way back in 1961, a law that has protected working women for decades.
So as you can see, the directive principles are anything but historical relics. They are a dynamic, living part of how India is governed, constantly pushing the country forward. And that leaves us with a really important question to think about for our times. As society changes and we face new challenges, how do we keep reinterpreting and rebalancing those two wheels of the chariot?
So there you have it. The directive principles really are the moral compass guiding the ship of state, always pointing towards a more just and equitable society. If you got something valuable out of this explainer, you know what to do. Please give it a like and be sure to subscribe to Deep Dive Daily so you don't miss the next one. Thanks so much for joining me.